All right, guys, what's up again? We're back on the content grind. I was feeling kind of motivated to do this list. I saw a cool tier list done by MTG Goldfish of utility lands in EDH. Generally, I don't agree with their takes on a lot of cards, but I like the idea, so I went ahead and went with it. Threw together my own list of utility lands that I thought were worth talking about. I think basically all of them they had talked about too. So if you want to, watch the original thinkers of the idea, go check out their video. But yeah, we're here doing another tier list, having fun doing these. So we're going to talk about utility lands. So once again, quick rundown of how the tiers work. So S is like, the most playable best cards in the format. Any opportunity that you have to play the card, you probably should, unless there's some, very, very specific reason that you shouldn't be with the build that you have, like a weird restriction or something like that. A is like excellent cards that you're going to play a lot. Most situations you're going to play them for power level reasons and otherwise. There's some of the best cards without being, insane, completely insane. B is like, average cards that you're happy to play, cards that you will play. You'll play them fairly frequently, but, they're just good cards. C is like below average. Generally, I'm looking for a pretty specific reason to be playing these cards. They're cards that you'll only see within specific circumstances and things like that. And then finally, D is cards that I'm actively not looking to play, or you need a very, very, very specific reason to be playing the card, and even then, it's probably subpar and kind of whatever. All right. So let's get started then. First up, Thespian Stage. Thespian Stage is a colorless land, enters untapped, and it says pay 2, tap it. Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability. So Thespian Stage is pretty easy A for me. This card is just a really solid card. Its opportunity cost is very low, except when you're getting 3+ colors. Because it's just an untapped utility land. And then with all the very powerful lands in the format, like other lands we're going to talk about, you'll be, very happy to play this card. Very good utility, strong card. You'll see it a lot. Next up, we have High Market. High Market's another colorless untapped land that says sacrifice a creature, you gain a life with no additional cost to it. High Market is a very good card. I'm going to put it at B. So High Market is a very nice land. It gives you flexibility of having a sack outlet on a land, which is pretty hard to come by, and very, very useful for your creature decks. It protects like very important combo piece cards from getting exiled. Doesn't use the stack. It sacrifices the creature's part of the cost, so it doesn't really use the stack. They can't really interact with you wanting to sack it. It's just a very good protection outlet, and sometimes you need to get your engine for your sack outlet deck going, and you may not have a sack outlet on board, so this kind of helps turn the wheels a bit. So I'm happy with a B on this one. It's a good card. Play it in your sacrifice decks. It's a very good role player. Next up, we got the Hideaway lands. I'm using Mosswort Bridge as kind of a stand-in because it's kind of the best one. The Hideaway lands are there's one for each color. They enter the battlefield tapped. And you look at the top 4 cards of your library. You exile one of them underneath this land, and then they have their color tap to play the exiled card with some sort of condition you have to meet. So the green one, you need 10 total power. Shelldock Isle, the blue one, you have to have like 20 cards or less in your library, so that one's not really playable. The black one's not really playable because all players have to have no cards in hand. The white one is playable. It's when 3 creatures attack. You can do it. And then finally, the the red one is when somebody is dealt 7 damage in a turn. So really only 3 of the colors are playable. And even the ones that are playable, I'm going to put them at C. I'm kind of debating putting them at B because I'm just really not excited about these lands. I think what kind of puts them up to C for me is in like 1 or 2 color, like, budget decks and stuff. They are card advantage, but you do have to meet a condition. But you're happy to do that as long as you are, can get some sort of significant upside, or you can meet the condition very easily. The green one, like I said, is by far the easiest condition to meet because you're going to play creatures in your green deck, and 10 power is like pretty easy to hit. But even then, I'm not really like super interested in this card. Yeah, it's just a C for me. Next up, we have the artifact lands. There's one for each color, and then there's also Darksteel Citadel for colorless, and it's indestructible. I'm going to put these at B, but I do think people overplay these. So there is a pretty significant downside of these being artifacts. They just randomly get swept up in Vandal Blasts or, whatever sort of effect like that, Shattering Sprees, etc. So if you're going to put these in your deck, just make sure you really care about it being an artifact. Like you're having some sort of deck that has affinity, or you play cards in your deck that can duplicate artifacts reliably, so they kind of act as ramp. So yeah, these are at B, but just make sure that you really want these in your deck. When they're good in your deck, they are good. They are worth the include. That's why I put them at B. The opportunity cost is pretty little, but it is there. Just randomly losing your lands to like board wipes and stuff feels pretty bad. But yeah, if you care about them, they are good in your deck. Just don't overplay them. Next up, we have Gavony Township. It's an untapped colorless land, but you do have to be in Selesnya because it has an activated ability of 2 green-white tap. Put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. This effect for just having it on just an untapped land is very good. Putting a 1/1 creature on all your creatures is nothing to scoff at for sure. If you're in a Selesnya deck and you're, 3 colors or less, then this is definitely an interesting card that I would consider running, especially if you're in exactly Selesnya. This card is almost kind of a free roll, unless your deck is like super color intensive. Even if the 1/1 counters aren't like a big deal, like when you got nothing better to do, you just make your entire team bigger is pretty nice. It's a very nice upside. So I'm gonna put this at a B as well. You'll be happy to play this in your Selesnya +1 color decks. Next up, we have another land from the set. Kessig Wolfrun. Same thing, except this one is X red green tap. Target creature gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. Now this is one I'm very excited to play if I'm in Jund. This can just randomly kill people out of nowhere. Rather than just pumping your whole team, this is going to get one creature in there and it's going to get them in there real good. So, and you can do it after blocks and all sorts of stuff. So, yeah, Kessig Wolfrun is a great combat trick. And it's a great mana sink. So I'm happy to put this much higher on the Bs. I'll put it above high market. I'll put it top of B. Next up, Scavenger Grounds. It's another colorless untapped land. Pay 2, tap, sacrifice a desert. Exile all cards from graveyards. Notably, this is a desert, so you're probably just going to be sacking this. Like a lot of these other colorless untapped lands, the cost of include of this card is like, as long as I'm not in 3+ colors, then like then I start looking at these utility lands and see which ones I want to play. And Scavenger Grounds is a great one. Now, the only decks I don't want to play Scavenger Grounds in are decks that I am heavily reliant on my own graveyard, which happens to be a lot of my decks. I like Recursion. It allows for a lot more consistency. So if you're a deck that will like occasionally play with your graveyard, maybe you have like a few reanimation spells in your deck or something just for value, then you can definitely consider Scavenger Grounds. But if you're doing like all sorts of like Sabine's Reclamation, Sun Titan effects, stuff like that, or you're heavily, living deathing and stuffing like that, then like this is probably not a card that you're going to be looking at. But that being said, in the decks that it's good in, it's excellent in, and you're going to be very happy that you have it when you need it. Graveyard Hate is essential in our format, and this you just get to throw it on a land, so you don't even have to use real cards in your deck to play it. So once again, I'm putting this in B. I'm going to put this here. Next up, got Shizo Death Storehouse. Now this is kind of a stand-in for the OG Kamigawa Legendary lands. I think Shizo's probably the best one, but the blue one and stuff are really good as well. These are just kind of free rolls, right? Like, They're just untapped lands that produce one color of their type, and then they have some sort of benefit for a legendary permanent of some kind. Red one gives haste, blue one untaps it, yada yada yada. These are the only time once I start getting to like 3 colors and over 3 colors, then maybe I'm kind of looking at these cards and considering maybe playing basics in my deck if I have like green in my colors where I need a number of basics to like ramp and stuff. But outside of that, yeah, these are near free rolls in almost every sense. So I'm gonna put these up in A because the cost of include is just so low for these cards, and they are have a very high upside. So yeah, A for me for the original Kamigawa lands. Next up, Ghost Quarter. Taps for colorless. Tap sack, destroy a land. It's controlling my search library for basic land, put it on the battlefield, then they shuffle. Ghost Quarter is essential to our format. One thing that's very important is having answers to lands that are very powerful, like some of them we will talk about on this list. And this is one I'm always happy to play. Once I'm past like 3+ colors, like a lot of these colorless untapped lands, then I have to like, maybe not play these because the color restriction on my deck, I just don't have room for utility lands. But in decks that need utility lands, this is one that I'm looking to, especially if I'm on a budget. So Ghost Quarter, this seems like a bottom of A to me. Excellent land. Always be looking to play lands like this. Next up, Command Beacon. Taps for a colorless. Tap and sack the Command Beacon. Put your commander into your hand from the command zone. Command Beacon is good. It's a card I'm happy to play in decks that have expensive commanders, or decks that are very reliant on their commander and aren't too color intensive. So like 2 colors and under. 3 color decks, even if my commander is kind of mana intensive, I'm getting pretty off this card. This is one that I'm not looking to stretch my colors for in almost any circumstance. So I'm gonna put this. I think the power level of this card is still worth it putting into B. It's borderline C for me. But the utility is nice on this card, and it can save you a ton of mana if your deck is very reliant on your commander. But yeah, I'm not really looking to play this card once I get into like 3 or 4 colors. This is kind of 2 colors and under for me. So it just skirts by into the bottom of B for me. Next up, War Room. Taps for a colorless. Pay 3, tap it. Pay life equal to your number of colors in your commander's color identity. Draw a card. So we have a lot of lands that can draw you cards for pretty mana intensive sequences. But this one is definitely the best one out of all of them. Like it's just another untapped colorless land, so the cost of include is not much. And the decks that you're going to want to play that in are low color decks because that's the decks you can afford to play a colorless utility land. And this, paying life instead of having a ton of extra mana or meeting other requirements. This card's excellent. The fewer colors, the better. And the fewer colors you're playing, the more you're going to want this card. So this is a bottom of A for me. War Room's a card that I'm always happy to play. It just gives me gas. It gives you real cards in value when you have nothing better to do. And that's when you're going to want to activate this card, is when you have nothing better to do. And you're going to want to put in your low color decks, which this card is telling you to do anyway. So yeah, all the things just line up to War Room being a good card. Next, Cabal Stronghold. Taps for a colorless, pay 3, tap, add a black to your mana pool for each basic swamp you control. I play a lot on mono black, and even in my mono black decks, I'm not really happy to play this card. And this card would only ever be interesting in mono black. Only counting for your basic swamps is a really tough ask, because you have to get 4 basic swamps before this even makes black mana. At the very least, this will still tap for colorless. So the cost of include is so low because you're only going to play this in mono black. I mean, technically you can play it in a 2-color deck because if you have another land on this list that makes all land swamps, then your basic forests are also basic swamps because they are still basic, but they just also have the swamp type. But still, I'm not really interested in playing this in 2-color. You have to stretch way too hard for this already in mono color. I'm really between C and D here. I'm thinking I'm gonna put this in D. I'm just not really ever interested in playing this card. I've tried this in like a 20 plus swamp mono black deck that's really mana intensive, and even then it was like I almost never activated it. And that deck plays like all the like Gauntlet of Powers, Cage Suns. So like I play as many swamps as I can, and even then, like this card just hardly ever produces any mana. I would rather just play a swamp in those decks and double it from all my other Cryptcast effects and such. So yeah, I'm just on D in this card. Next up, we got Castle Locthwain. This is basically the whole cycle of the castles. All of them enter the battlefield tapped unless you control the land of their color. In this case, it's a swamp. They tap for the color of mana that they are. And then they have an effect of between like 3 and 4 mana where you pay that cost, you tap it, and then you get an effect. So the black one, you draw a card, you lose life equal to the number of cards in your hand. The blue ones, 4 tap, scry 2. The red ones tap 3 and tap, and then all your creatures get +1/+0. The white one's 4 and tap, you make a 1/1. And then the green one is arguably the best with a black one. You pay 4 and tap, and then you add 6 green to your pool that you can only play creatures with. So these I'm only interested in playing in 1 and 2 colors because they do require you to have a specific land type to enter untapped. But when you're playing 1 and 2 colors, you basically always have that. So these are just basically free rolls. They they hardly even take up a utility slot because they produce the color that your deck actually is. They're not colorless lands. And the upside of, having a mana sink when you have nothing better to do is real nice. So the black one can draw you cards like War Room. This one's going to hurt you a little bit more than War Room, but it does produce black mana, which is really, really nice. So I think it kind of is on par with War Room. The green one actually ramps you because it takes 5 mana and turns it into 6 when you want it. So that one's really good because, like I said, once again, it's basically a free roll. And then the other ones are just kind of whatever. The Castle Locthwain and the green one, I would probably put at A. The other 3, I would probably put at B. So where am I at with the cycle? I think I'm gonna put the cycle. In A. I think the reason being is just they're just so free roll in 1 and 2 color decks that like there's no reason that you shouldn't play them, and the utility that they give you is really nice. So yeah, I'm gonna put them at bottom of A. You'll always be happy to play these in your 1 and 2 color decks. Don't play them in 3 colors. None of their effects are worth it. Yeah. Next up, we have the Throne of Eldraine common lands. There's only 2 of them that are even worth playing. This one and then the black one. The black one allows you to put a creature on top of your deck. They basically enter untapped if you control 3 lands of the type of the color that they are. So this one's island. And then when they enter untapped, they do an effect. So the blue one puts an instant or sorcerer on top of your deck. The black one puts a creature on top of your deck. And the other 3 are irrelevant. They make like foods or whatever. They're useless. Except in very niche scenarios. So I'm really only rating like Mystic Sanctuary, honestly. The black one's hardly even playable too, in my opinion. So we'll just say this is just rating Mystic Sanctuary. This card is very powerful. I'm only really looking to play this in 2 color, similar to the reasons for the castles. Having 3 lands of the land type that they are besides this is kind of hard to do, even in 2 colors. But once you do for this one, it's pretty worth it. Being able to put your Cyclonic Rift or whatever on top of your deck and then immediately draw it so that way you can use it. This is also fetchable, so if you have a Scalding Tarn or whatever, you can go get this when you need it. So yeah, Mystic Sanctuary is a pretty stellar card. I'm kind of between top of B and bottom of A for this. Where do I want to put this? I think because it requires such, strict requirements to kind of get this thing online. I think I'm going to put it bottom or top of B. It does ask a lot of you to do the effect. Now the effect is really good. And luckily it is fetchable, but yeah, it does ask a lot from you, and it does require you to be in a specific build. So all that said, I think I'm happy with putting it top of B. Next up, we have Phyrexian Tower. Taps for a colorless mana. You can tap and sack a creature, add black to your pool. Now this one is like high market on steroids. Because the one life that high market gives you is very mediocre. Like, unless you're in specifically a life gain deck that also cares about sacking, then like high market's good. So like Dina or whatever. But even then, it's kind of still whatever. You had to hit your opponents for an extra damage or whatever. So who cares? Phyrexian Tower. Now this card, even in like 3 and 4 color decks, I'm still interested in this card for sure. Because if I have extra creatures lying around, or I'm a sacrifice deck specifically, this just ramps me. It makes me one more mana than it's supposed to, and it's the mana color, one of the mana colors that I care about. Yeah, Phyrexian Tower is just stellar for all the same reasons high market is, but like even better, because I also still get mana when I'm sacking the creature, unlike high market, and it's extra mana that I probably shouldn't have. So Phyrexian Tower, I'm like top of A, S on Phyrexian Tower. I think I'm gonna stay top of A. I'm trying to reserve S for some really powerful cards, like super insane cards, like the one I'm about to talk about. So yeah, I think I'm happy with Phyrexian Tower top of A. It is very powerful, but it's not like game breaking. So, but it's definitely a land I'm willing to stretch to, even in like 3 and 4 colors. So, I'm very happy with Phyrexian Tower. Top of A sounds great to me. Next up, we have Field of the Dead. Enters the battlefield tapped at a colorless mana. So the cost of including this card in your deck is pretty high. It's a tapped colorless land. However, Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control. If you control 7 or more lands with different names, you get a 2/2 black zombie. Notably, that zombie is not tapped, so it can do whatever untapped creatures do, like block and such, as soon as you get this online. Field of the Dead's just a broken card, man. This card is just stupid. Nowadays, with things like I was talking about earlier, like the untapped Kamigawa lands and such, this card is just very free roll, and it's even worth warping your entire deck's mana base if you can reliably land ramp to get just free zombies. And like on the surface, like a lot of like when this card first came out, a lot of people on the surface, even commander players, were kind of like, they're just tutus, man. Like, I don't know. It doesn't, like, what are tutus gonna do, you know? But like, they're just free tutus, and you just get so many of them. And yeah, this deck's so powerful that it's warping your entire mana base around. It's worth warping your entire mana base around it. And you can even do the trick of having like half basics and half snow basics, because they do have different names, but you're still, you know, including basics in a large number of basics in your deck. And yeah, I mean, feel that it's just a broken card. This card's S. It's worth warping your whole deck around. If you have any sort of land ramp, you're just gonna have just a zombie printing machine on just, you know, a land that you do nothing but have a off turn with it, have a tap land for it. So yeah, even in like 3 and 4 color, 5 color decks, if you're a land stack, like, doesn't matter how many colors you are, you're gonna play this card. And like, the more colors that you add, the more you know, different names of lands that you have, because you have all these different duels. And yeah, Field of Dead's just so free roll and so powerful in any deck. Even like, you can even play it in like mono green, which is something I'm trying out now and having really good success with. So Field of Dead's just a broken card. It's just an S. Yeah, nothing else needs to be said. Next up, Hall of Heliod's Generosity. Taps for a colorless mana. You can pay 1 white tap, put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library. This card is very good. Once again, it's a colorless untapped land, so the cost of including your deck is not high. But this is a card I'm once again looking at in 3 colors as well. If my deck cares about enchantments, or even if my deck only has like 8 enchantments, but it has a few really key enchantments that are really powerful that I don't want to lose, then I'm still looking at this card. It's definitely one that I would stretch for if I care about enchantments or have very powerful enchantments that I need. So Hall of Heliod's Generosity is an A for me. I'm gonna put it above the castles. Put it above War Room. Yeah, I'm pretty happy right here. Hall of Heliod's Generosity is very good. Play it even in like non-enchanter stacks and stuff. If you got good enchantments that you really don't want to lose, play it. Next up, Cabal Coffers. This land doesn't tap for any mana, but if you pay 2 and tap it, you add a black for each swamp you control. This card is pretty grossly overplayed, in my opinion. I see people trying to play it in like 3-color decks and such all the time, and you definitely cannot do that with this card. Unless you're like specifically a lands deck where you can go get this and Urborg, and you have a good outlet for all the black mana you're going to make. Yeah. This card is grossly overplayed, but I'm going to try to neglect that a little bit. I'm going to try to, put my head into the circumstances where you should actually play this card, such as 2-color decks that are very black heavy, or 2-color decks that can reliably search up any land, or mono black. And in those decks, this card is insane. It's probably going to be the best land in your deck. It's going to generate you an insane amount of mana, especially if you have this and Urborg out. Then it's, then you can't. Then this is a swamp and everything's a swamp. Yeah, it produces so much black mana. The problem is people just put this in their deck as a land slot in their 3-color decks and such, and like they just hope to get like Urborg and Cabal Coffers. And we're gonna get to Urborg later, so we'll talk about that then. But Cabal Coffers, like, this card's pretty grossly overplayed. But that being said, if I kind of take it out of those scenarios that I see it in and put it into the actual scenarios where people should play it, this card is very, very good and deserves a pretty easy A. I think I'm going to put it right here. Thespian Stage is a little bit more universally applicable than Cabal Coffers, but the decks that Cabal Coffers gets played in and is good in, it's way up here for sure. But it does require very specific circumstances, but as soon as you meet them, this card is amazing. Next up, Bojuka Bog. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's graveyard, taps for a black. Bojuka Bog is just an amazing card. Like I said earlier, you need graveyard hate in your decks. This is a card that you can play even in your decks that care about your own graveyard. And, the cost of it include is just a tap land. It still produces one of the colors that you care about. So it's pretty close to a free roll. You just, sneak this in on an off turn. Or if you sneak it on a key turn where somebody's starting to fill up their graveyard and you see some key pieces starting to show up in there that they want back, you hit this with them, and sometimes you can just win the game or just completely ruin their game plan. And doing that just on a tapped colored land is extremely high value. So I'm at top of A or S on this one. I think I'm gonna keep this top of A. This card is very good and very useful, and you should play it in the vast majority of decks that you can. There's just a few circumstances that I'm considering not playing this in, like in 4 and 5 colors and stuff. So, and sometimes you're not gonna have a graveyard deck in the game, so it's kind of not always super stellar, but you should play it in your decks. And when it hits, it's good. And like I said, cost of include for this card is extremely low. So top of A, I think it deserves. Next up, we're going to talk about a real stinker. Oran-Reef the Vastwood. Enters the battlefield tapped, produces a green. You can tap it to put a 1/1 counter on each green creature you control that entered the battlefield this turn. Now, similar to Bojuka Bog, this is a tap land that produces a color that you care about. So I mean, the cost of include, just like Bojuka Bog, is fairly low for a lot of circumstances. But the upside for this card of having to leave this land untapped, so you cannot use this mana on the turn that you play these green specifically creatures, and then all you get is you just get to put a 1/1 counter on them. I just basically never want to play this card, even in my +1 counters deck. Like, even if I'm in a Simic +1 counters deck, I'm not really looking to play this card, because I would rather just play a lot of these other better utility lands that we have on this list, or just another forest, so that way I have a number of basics in my deck that I can actually go fetch and such. So yeah, I mean, the fact that it only hits green creatures and they had to have entered the battlefield this turn, this card is just nothing to me. I don't think it does anything. And the fact that it enters tapped, I'd rather just, do something else, like just a basic or something. So this is a D for me, for sure. Next up, we have the newest Kawigama cycle of legendary lands. There's one for each color, and these have the channel ability. So you pay a cost and you discard them for the mana that they ask for, and then they do an effect, and then their colorless cost gets reduced based on the number of legendary creatures you control. So the one on and they enter untapped. They're just legendary forests or swamps for all intents and purposes. So I have the best one on the screen that everybody knows about, Boseiju Who Endures. This one taps for a green. You channel it for a colorless and a green. And you get to destroy an artifact, enchantment, non-basic land. And then they get a basic land type land onto the battlefield. These are all free rolls. As free rolls get. They're hardly even utility lands. I only consider them utility lands because... sometimes you will want to hold them in your hand and not play them, so they do have a utility effect. But yeah, these are just as free roll as they get. They're just untapped colorless lands, similar to the previous Kawigama cycle. But all of these have actual spell effects on them rather than like very specific, like legendary permanent sort of matters things like the OG ones did. So these, like I said, these are just free rolls. They get their spells when you need them to. Uncounterable spells, since they are an effect. You discard them, then you get the effect. You don't like cast them or anything like that. So they have to have a stifle or something, which people don't really run in regular Commander, except very niche scenarios. And yeah, they're just really powerful. They're free rolls. Sometimes the effects are minimal. Like on the red one, you just get like 2 1/1s. But hey, maybe you're a deck that has Purphoros, and maybe, that's a lot of damage that you can throw around for just having a mountain in your deck, essentially. So yeah, these are as free rolls get. These are an easy S for me. They're spells when you want them to be spells, and they're untapped lands when you need them to be untapped lands. So yeah, I mean, even in 4+ colors, I'll play Boseiju and one of the other ones that I care about, like Takenuma or whatever. If they have an effect that I like, then I'm interested in playing them for sure. So easy S for me. Next up, we have a land that people sleep on a lot, Cephalid Coliseum. This is technically a cycle, but none of the other ones are like super good. So I'm not really too interested in talking about any of the other ones. We're just going to talk about Cephalid Coliseum because this one is excellent. It's an untapped land that produces blue, and then when you use it to get blue mana, it deals 1 damage to you. So pretty moderate downside to nothing downside. And then it has an effective threshold. When you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can activate this ability, which is pay blue, tap, and sack the land. You draw 3 cards, and then you discard 3 cards from your hand. That's a lot of cards that you get to see and sculpt your hand with. And all it asks for you is just essentially an island. And then you have to have some cards in your graveyard, which you'll eventually hit. And this land just kind of pings you every once in a while. You'll lose a few life to this, but the utility of this card is very, very high. Card selection gives you a ton of card selection just on an island. This card is very good. I'm going to put this into the A range. There's a lot of 3-color decks that and if I'm looking to fill up my graveyard at all, this is a land I'm interested in playing. I have a 4-color deck that I have this in, so you can. This card is worth stretching for, and the cost of inclusion is just so low. It seems like a pretty easy A for me. I'll put it bottom of A though, just because it's a standalone and not like a whole cycle or anything that's worth talking about. Next up, we got Buried Ruin. Taps for a colorless. Pay 2, tap, and sack it. Return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. This card is extremely good. If you care about artifacts, then you probably want to play this in your deck. Unless your deck is very color intensive, 4 and 5 colors, like a lot of these untapped colorless lands, obviously. But even then, I've played a Brea deck where I played this in, and I was very happy with it. But some decks care about very particular artifacts, and they don't have a lot of ways to get back artifacts, such as mono black. If I'm in mono black and my Ashnod's Altar gets blown up, I'm pretty sad. But with this Buried Ruin, I can actually get it back without having to, play specifically like Yawgmoth's Will or whatever to get it back. So Yeah, Buried Ruin's an excellent card. Even if you just have a few key artifacts in your deck, similar to Hall of Heliod's Generosity, the cost of include for this card is quite low, and the payoff is very high if it's an effect that you care about. And it gives it to colors that don't normally have access to it. So this is an easy A for me as well. Bottom of A. Next up, we have a super overplayed card, Rogue's Passage. Taps for a colorless. Pay 4, tap it. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Notably, one cute thing you can do is target your opponent's creatures that are attacking. So definitely keep that in mind and make deals with this card. That being said, people just free roll this card like Reliquary Tower in their decks when like they don't really have like any real like beaters that they actually even want to get in there with. So this card is like uber overplayed, but it is good in some decks, and the decks that it's like good in aren't like, it's not like stellar, but it's like a good role player. But yeah, this card is super overplayed. Like, if you want any other proof, just look through all the other like colorless utility lands we've talked about and start putting those in your deck instead of this, and then, you know, play your other fixing lands and such. But yeah, this card is like super meh to me. I've had decks that really want Rogue's Passage, and even in those decks, it's like fine, you know. So I'm on C. I think I'm above the Hideaway lands, but yeah, this effect's super overplayed. Next up, we have Inventor's Fair. At the beginning of upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain a life. Okay. Enters the battlefield as a colorless untapped land. You can pay 4, tap, and sack this. Search library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle your library. Activate it only if you have 3 or more artifacts. This card, very similar to Buried Ruin, is good for all the same reasons. It tutors artifacts in decks that can't normally do that. It's just on the land, so the cost includes extremely low. Once again, I've played this even in 4-color decks and been very happy with it. Yeah. Inventor's Fair is excellent for all the same reasons Buried Ruin is. Just a different effect. This one tutors instead of gets things back, which is probably a more powerful and wanted for effect. So this one's an easy A for me. I'm going to put it up here. I think I'm going to even put it above Cabal Coffers. Nah, I'm not going to put it above Cabal Coffers. I'm going to put it above the original Kawigama lands, though. Yeah, play Inventor's Fair. If you're an artifacts deck, look to play it. Almost no matter how many colors you are, you'll be happy with it. Next up, the aforementioned Reliquary Tower. It's a colorless untapped land. You have no max hand size. So this card is even more overplayed than Rogue's Passage. Yes, the cost of include of this card is low, but once again, look at all these other effects we could be playing from colorless utility lands, and then look at Reliquary Tower. How often in your like mono red, black decks, white decks, red white decks, all this stuff that I see this card in, how many of those times are you going to be greater than 7 cards? And how many of those times are you not going to be like need more than 7 cards, right? Like if you have 9 cards in hand, like do you really need like those 4 lands in your hand? No, you just discard 2 of them, right? Like, yeah, Reliquary Tower is like super mediocre outside of like very specific circumstances. Like if you're like in a deck that cares about having a very large number of cards in your hand, like your creature's power and toughness is equal to the number of cards in your hand or whatever, or yeah, just effects like that. If you consistently like blue sunning zenithing sort of effects, then like, yeah, this card's good in those circumstances, but those are very niche circumstances. In your average deck, this card just doesn't do anything, and you should just be playing another like fixing land or like one of these other really great utility lands. So yeah, I'm almost on D on this card, but I think I'm gonna leave it in bottom of C because this card is useful in some cases. So yeah, I'll put it at bottom of C. Next up, we have like the worst land in the format. Temple of the False God. Tap to add 2 colorless mana, but you can only activate it if you got 5 or more lands. So this card is just dead unless you already have a bunch of mana to actually play the game with, and then all it does is ramp you 1. So the cost of this include is very high, because if you only have a 2 lands or 3 lands in your opening hand, it's essentially -1 because this card doesn't do anything. And even in the decks that like are gonna consistently have a lot of lands and hit this number, ahead of time, then like you could just play better utility lands. You're probably like a Field of the Dead deck or whatever. You could play like all that sort of stuff instead of this garbage that doesn't even produce mana. And like if you look at like something like this card and a card I didn't put on this list, Ancient Tomb, because that isn't really a utility land to me. It's just a mana ramp good land that you just play in decks. This one I put on utility just because I kind of wanted to talk about because of how shit it is. But yeah, there was a time where this card did get played in the format because I don't know, because we didn't know any better. And then Wizards is like, oh, all these commander plays like Temple of the False God, and it's not very expensive. Let's just put it in every precon. So, I mean, this card is just completely useless. Don't play this card, basically in any circumstance at all, ever, for any reason. This is just, I didn't create its own tier, but it deserves its own tier. This is just an F. I'm never interested in this card. Next up, Volrath Stronghold. Tap, add a colorless mana, 1 black tap, put a creature from your graveyard on top of your library. This is similar to Hall of Heliod's Generosity, except even more applicable because every deck's got creatures in it. And yeah, you just want your creatures back, right? Like, yeah, and if you're playing black, you care about your creatures, and you're going to have creatures in your graveyard, and you want them back. So this card is just kind of a free roll. I'm interested in this card in 3 colors, maybe stretching it with 4 colors depending on my deck. But yeah, I mean, this card's Hall of Heliod's Generosity, but even more applicable and generally better. So yeah, the only problem with this card is it's reserveless, so they're expensive and hard to get. But taking that out of the equation, this is just an easy A for me. I'm gonna put it. I'm gonna put it up here. Next up, got Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Notably, this land does not have any color restriction on it, but it does make each land a swamp, so essentially it produces black mana. One nice thing about this card, and I kind of am lumping Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth into this too, is you can play them in any deck. So if you're just like let's say you're a mono white deck that really likes its utility lands for whatever reason, you can play both of these, and then all your utility lands that maybe couldn't have tapped for mana tap for mana now, which is really sweet. The green one doesn't have a lot of applications outside of that. Urborg does. Obviously, it works with the aforementioned stuff that Cabal Coffers does, such as this Cabal Stronghold. If you have non-swamp basics, like I said once again, which you probably shouldn't do, but if you are, then it's good for that. These are just ultra free rolls, right? Like if you are a deck that's playing black, like you just play this instead of a swamp, and then it fixes black mana for the rest of the game, or vice versa with the green one. If you're playing a green deck and you need green mana, then you just play that, and then all your lands produce green, and then you're permanently fixed for green. So, yeah, Urborg seems like it's like a super, super fixing land that also has, and Yavimaya, that also has a lot of utility. So this is, I think I'm going to put these in S, because they're just so free roll, and they provide so much good fixing, and then Urborg even has extra little utility with some other cards. So yeah, I think Yavimaya and Urborg deserve the S. If you're playing a deck with their colors, it's going to be hard for you not to include them. Next up, we got Vesuva. Enters the battlefield as a copy of any land tapped. So I think this card is slightly worse than Thespian Stage, because this card can be a little bit more awkward. Sometimes it's just going to enter the battlefield as a tapped, whatever your best dual land is, which is like fine, right? So like the cost of include for this card is quite low, even in like 3+ color decks. And then sometimes you can snipe a really nice Field of the Dead or any of these other cards we talked about up here. So that's pretty sweet. But I think I'm going to put it right next to Thespian Stage and A. But I think I'm going to put it below Thespian Stage, because I do really value the fact that Thespian Stage enters untapped, even though it only produces colorless. Because you're still going to want to not play it like immediately during the early turns in the same way you don't want to with Vesuva if you really want to get your value out of Vesuva. With Thespian Stage, you can just play it anytime. Vesuva, you kind of got to, slow roll it a little bit. But yeah, Vesuva's great. If you're playing Thespian Stage, Vesuva's probably another land that you're going to play and be very happy with. Next up, we have the Super Ghost Quarter. Strip Mine and Wasteland I'm putting here as well because they essentially do the same thing. They both add a colorless, and you can tap sack them to destroy a land in Strip Mine's case or destroy a non-basic in Wasteland's case, which is essentially basically the same thing. You want to blow up powerful non-basics like Gaia's Cradles and cards on this list. So these are, man, am I on A or S? The fact that they are untapped colorless lands kind of limits you a little bit, but I'm still playing these in 3-color decks, similar to like I talked about with Ghost Quarter. These effects are essential. You do need these in your decks. You need ways to blow up problematic lands. And Ghost Quarter actually gives your opponents upside a little bit. They don't feel like ultra bad about it because they still get a basic replacement. These, they don't get anything, which is super sweet. But they do have a significant downside with, going down a land. But when you do go down a lane with these, you're going to be happy that you did. And these also have the case of if you are like a land stack where you're playing like Crucible Worlds and ramming up Excavator, whenever you got extra land drops lying around, you can just start blowing up your opponent's lands and, really causing them a lot of headache. So for that reason, they definitely deserve to be above Ghost Quarter. But I think I'm going to keep them around like this area. I think I'm going to put them definitely above the Kamigawa lands. I think since they're so essential, I'm going to put them above Inventor's Fair. But I'm not quite above like Cabal Coffers with these. So yeah, I think Strip Mine sits around here in the A category. Lastly, we have the Modal DFCs. I'm just basically making these just the good ones is the only ones I'm talking about here. Such as the mythic ones. All the mythic ones are basically free rolls. And then the rare ones are powerful effects but enter tapped. And then the two uncommons I would mention are like Balaguer Recovery and Colony Ambush. But these are excellent. The cost of including these is basically nothing. If they have any sort of effect that you care about on the back, you're going to play them because, they are lands when you need them and spells when you're not, similar to the channel lands. But these sometimes can have even more powerful effects like Aghanim's Awakening and the others. So this seems like another S for me. I think I'm even going to put them above Urborg. I think they deserve to be right here next to the channel lands. I think in general the channel lands are kind of better because all of them enter untapped and their effects typically are a little bit more meaningful and not quite as mana intensive. But there are some like Aghanim's Awakening's definitely. I would definitely play Aghanim's Awakening over a couple of the channel lands and such. So I'll put them next to each other here, and you can kind of decide where you fall on them. So yeah, that's my list. Notably, this is kind of like the top utility lands on EDH Rec, so that's why I have a lot of A's here. Some of them I also kind of included on my own, such as like Cephalid Coliseums and stuff like that, because they weren't on there and I wanted to talk about them. But yeah, that's why a lot of these kind of ranked highs, because these are the ones that you are going to see the most, so I wanted to talk about them. So that way you know that some of them you're overplaying, such as these C's and D's. But anything with like B's and up, you'll be happy to play, and I would recommend it. So hope you enjoyed this video. Tried to keep it a little bit more concise than the last couple. So yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for checking it out, and peace. Have a good one.